I've literally been sitting here for 5 minutes thinking how am I going to fit all of these books into one video? And then I remembered that I'm Scottish and speed talking is essentially a national skill. I have confidence in confidence alone, and I have confidence in my Scottish heritage. And you know what else that Scottish inheritance gives me confidence in? My ability to cram vast amounts of salt into a small space. Let's get to it. And welcome back to another video. Today it is time for my tops and bottoms, and much like myself, today's tops and bottoms are chunky. And I would like to lay claim that they are chunky yet funky. But out of the 9 books that I have to talk to you about here today, only 4 of them get to claim the title of chunky yet funky. The rest of them are just kind of stanky. Like, considering the epic slump that was October, I think it is safe to say that I have de-slumped. My bookish back is ramrod straight with pride. And believe me when I say it's the only straight thing in this house. But although I read so many books in November, there were so many fails. There was actually a point in mid-November where I just stood here in my library and was like, come on! Why? We have 2 months left in the year, guys. This is not the time for a run of bad books. But unfortunately, a run of bad books is exactly what we have. And I say unfortunately for me because I was reading them, but it's not unfortunately for you because you get to be here while I saltily rant about them. So as usual, sucks to be me. Oh yeah, and I should say, if you are new here, Tops and Bottoms is a way in which I wrap up my reading month by telling you only about the things that were amazing, the tippy tops, and the things that were aggressively not amazing, the bottomiest bottoms, if you will. But before we get into today's tops and bottoms, I first have to thank the sponsors of today's video, Ana Luisa. In case you have never heard of Ana Luisa before, welcome, hi. Ana Luisa are a luxury sustainable jewellery brand with pieces that start at just $39, which means that you can be inspired to elevate your style for not a bank-breaking amount of money. Because let's be honest, festive season do be spenny. And sometimes it can be hard to get gifts for people that don't just feel like throwaway items. But that is definitely where Ana Luisa comes in, because almost every piece that I wear in my videos, every piece that you guys ask me about constantly, comes from Ana Luisa, and that is because their pieces go with almost everything, which makes it much easier to shop for your loved ones with them. I've just recently picked up this piece, which is Ana Luisa's Chloe necklace, a absolutely stunning reversible coin necklace with a beautiful kind of 90s mood ring feel to it for myself and for my bestie. And the two of us have completely different styles, but this will complement both of them. And the good thing about Ana Luisa is that you can buy with them with confidence. Not only are all of their pieces tarnish tested and humidity tested, meaning that anything that you gift is going to last for a very, very long time, but they are also a completely carbon neutral company, meaning that your gifting experience will not affect the planet at all. And on top of all of that, today I get to offer you an amazing 35% discount site-wide. And remember, if you're in the US, that means free shipping, and if you're anywhere else in the world, that means the most affordable shipping that you are going to find anywhere. And it is so fast, so it will 100% be there in time for you to pop under the tree. If you would like to get your 35% discount with Ana Luisa today, then follow my link down below in the description. I guarantee you and your loved ones will not be disappointed. But I was disappointed. Not in Ana Luisa, but in many of these books. I was bitterly disappointed. So consider yourself my free therapy, and let's get to the first book on my naughty list. Now, it's really sad when you have this many crap books to choose from. Let's start with a controversial one, shall we? We'll just give that boat a little nudge. Get chugging on down that creek. You know which creek I'm talking about, don't you? The first book on my personal burn it list is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. And I literally have so much to say about this book that I'm gonna have to force myself to whittle the points down. I picked up A Study in Drowning as my first book for Mixtape-a-thon, and it was a most anticipated book for me. I have been waiting for this release for most of the year. I got the lovely, beautiful Waterstone sprayed edges version, and it only sat on my cart for like 5 minutes before I was like, I need an excuse to read this. And I should also point out that this is not my first go around with Ava Reid. I have read The Wolf and the Woodsman, and I really enjoyed it. Albeit I enjoyed it for a very specific reason, which is also the reason that I think A Study in Drowning doesn't work. Ava Reid is what I would call a very conscious writer. And by that I mean you are aware as a reader that the writer is in the text with you. You can feel the strings being pulled, and in Ava Reid's case that is because I think she wants to create a very specific atmosphere for you when you go into her books. The Wolf and the Woodsman is very consciously Grimm's fairy tales. That is the environment that you have signed up to when you go into that book, and Ava Reid is determined that she is going to serve you that. And this for me is different from the occasions where I feel emotionally manipulated by an author, because that's something that I've mentioned before that I really, really hate. Because that's the same kind of construct that you have in horror over and over again. It's the same kind of construct that allows haunted house novels to work. Hello? Would you like to share my chair? Wow, Esme bought on camera. I am privileged. You can have the back, I'll have the front, okay? For Madame, can I go back to talking about the bad book? But unfortunately, in my opinion, not only did Ava Reid not deliver on the dark academia elements, but she didn't deliver on any of the rest of the book. Because this one isn't just a dark academia, it is also a high fantasy, and that is where the whole thing just broke apart for me. I was never sure where exactly I was. I didn't know if this was an alternative history Earth and we were in the 1940s, because a lot of the things that happen early on in this book really do suggest that that's where we are. But then we're given all of these fantasy elements where there are writers that are kept in state in glass coffins and they don't decay, and they're just like down the street in a museum where you can go look at them even though they're technically still probably live beings. You're in a city which is kind of in a neutral zone between these two warring factions, but you don't know whether they are countries or whether they are city-states. And despite this, despite the fact that this is going on in this city, both kind of sides mingle normally, and there is a boy, because of course there is, at her institution which comes from the other side. But nothing else about the war is okay. Because in one moment we're in lectures and she's sitting dreamily looking out the window, thinking very deep, dark academia thoughts, and then in the next minute we're talking about the possible resurrection of gods. I could not gain purchase at any point in this book to work out where I was supposed to be. And then on top of that, the main character is the most insipid person I have ever met. There are just like 2 paragraphs in the first chapter dedicated to the way that the sunlight lands on her golden hair, how her tweed outfit looks amongst all the cobblestones of this courtyard, and it's just, I could feel my brain dribbling out of my ears. But the thing that really did me in with this particular main character is that she needs to go to the library to get books out on a subject which is part of a competition, and so therefore of course there's going to be competition for people getting these books out. There's a finite amount of physical books. But when she goes there and speaks to the librarian, she's like, well, somebody else has taken out all of these books, and our main character has to stop herself from bursting into tears. Like, she actually does a lip wibble and kind of like, runs out of the door because it's so tragic that somebody else took the books out before me. And I was just like, why? Why is any of this happening? And I cannot emphasize enough that I think it is totally okay to go into a book just for the vibes, to sign up just for the vibes and stick around there when nothing else of note is going on, and for you to enjoy that. That is totally fine. We all have candy floss books that we consume because it's a perfectly you book. So if you are somebody who went into this book and everything in this book was completely perfect for you, that's amazing. But the vibes did not work for me. This time around, feeling the author do this kind of conscious writing and be on the page with me, being like, oh, look at this thing. It just didn't work. It did not work for me. And it did not work for me badly enough that I genuinely think this is probably going to be my last Ava Reid, because although I enjoyed The Wolf and the Woodsman, it wasn't like spectacular, blow my socks off. So I think that this is just an author where we're going to part ways. Next up, because there is one more bottom book than there is a top book, so let's just talk about it, because it is tangentially related to A Study in Drowning, in that when I DNF'd that book, I wanted another book to replace it for Mixtapeathon, because I wanted to have actually read and finished a book for each of the 5 prompts, which I know it's perfectly fine to count a DNF towards a prompt because it wasn't my fault that I didn't enjoy it. The little completionist inside me was like, no, we shall read something else. And so I went to look at my shelves to find a small book, and I found a small horror book that had been sitting there there for literally years. That book was You Should Have Left by Daniel Kelman, translated by Ross Benjamin, and the general vibe of this was that Ross Benjamin should have left this on his translation pile and I should have left it in the bookstore and walked the hell away very quickly. Guys, this book is 113 pages long and it managed to offend me on almost every one of those pages. This is essentially a rip-off of The Shining, where the main character is a scriptwriter and he hasn't produced anything decent in ages, and the last thing that he did produce was like a romantic comedy that he doesn't think there's any kind of artistic merit in, but he needs to write a sequel for because the studio are like, well, this is what you get paid for. And his solution to writing this is to take his wife and his very young child and take them to the German mountains and go and stay in a holiday home that is essentially a massive rip-off of the Overlook Hotel. Really, this book is just The Shining. I cannot emphasize that more. And maybe if you're a massive fan of The Shining, then you would love this one, but I am not. And not only is this a rip-off of The Shining, but now I come to think of it, it's also a massive rip-off of House of Leaves. Because the part in House of Leaves that is the Navidson record, which is the haunted house portion of it, is essentially replicated in this one, wherein the dimensions of the house just don't quite fit. There are suddenly corridors and rooms that weren't there before, and that is what this whole horror element is based on, and it's done, in my opinion, very poorly. There are like two tropes that the author leans really heavily on, and I'm not going to spoil them here in case you guys decide that you want to read this, although I would really advise against that. And in every other page of this book, this character is essentially complaining about his wife. She's not attentive enough, she's too attentive. She wants him to spend more time with the child, she doesn't think that he parents the child properly. There are so many scenes in this tiny book where this small child is neglected, brushed aside, told to shut up, made to go away, actually pushed out of the way by her dad. Like, it's awful. Watching it is literally an exercise in this is when you call social services. And it also does a really disgusting thing as far as I'm concerned. It justifies the main character's dismissive, rude, aggressive behaviour to his wife by giving his wife an extramarital affair. So because she's essentially cheating on him, she is a horrible, horrible person who should be reviled, and everything that he's ever done is justified. It's a horrible little book that I only finished because it is so incredibly short. So yeah, this one was almost on a literal burn it pile. Alright, let's switch gears really, really rapidly and talk about one of my tops, which was also a book that I picked up for Mixtape-a-thon because I needed a book with a creature in it. This is a book which I am really sad to say has sat on my shelf since it came out, and I consistently have gone, maybe I'll pick that up, and then I just haven't. The book that I am talking about is The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. I've talked about John Scalzi before on my channel. I absolutely adore his writing. Fuzzy Nation is one of my favourite sci-fi books ever, and if you are a Becky Chambers fan and you're looking for somewhere to go after Becky Chambers and you haven't checked out Fuzzy Nation, then my guys, you need to get on that. And John Scalzi really does have two different modes of sci-fi writing. He has the old man's war mode, which is very serious sci-fi writing in which very bad things happen and there are very high stakes. And he has this other mode of sci-fi writing which is deeply, deeply comic and kind of makes me think about Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams in a lot of ways, in that he's poking fun of a lot of things that happen in the real world whilst also giving you this fantastical setting to settle into. Now, I was also worried about this one for a number of different reasons. It begins during the pandemic, but it turned out that that was really, really well handled, and it was only kind of a thing for the first couple of chapters. So if you're massively triggered by that still, hello, join me. I am also a person who never wants to ever read another book in which the pepperoni is featured. I guarantee you that this portrayal of it is one of the best that you're going to find, because our main character goes home to his roommates who are queer and knows that if they have to go back to their parents' place, which is the only place that they can afford to go because they can't pay their rent, then they're just going to get dead named and mistreated and their mental health is going to suffer. And it is for that reason that he's like, I will do anything that I can to keep us together. He takes this absolutely insane job with the Kaiju Preservation Society. I absolutely soared through this book, and when I finished it I wanted to start it again, because I'll tell you what the vibe is. The vibe is Jurassic Park. Like, the vibe is you're coming to work at Jurassic Park and you're being taken through all of the systems that they have in place. You're being shown how they breed the dinosaurs, you're being shown how they work with them in the fields, you're being trained in the ways not to die in this environment which has these like prehistoric plants. And I'm not gonna lie, that's exactly why I loved it. Because who out of us who grew up with Jurassic Park and love Jurassic Park did not want to work in Jurassic Park? Who out of us who love Jurassic Park were not like, I don't want the whole thing to break apart. I don't want the dinosaurs to escape. I want them to be in their enclosure. I want them to be happy. Who out of us who felt all of that would not enjoy a book in which you essentially get to experience the main character doing that? Because the other extremely relatable thing about this book, the other thing that I loved so much, is that this main character is a guy who worked in admin and sales all his life. He has no qualifications or particular skills, and yet he goes into this environment with like scientists and doctors. Every time he gets introduced, he's like, hi, I'm this person. I lift things. Because the reality is that places like Jurassic Park would need somebody just to lift things. That would be me. That would be you. We would be the unskilled people in Jurassic Park, and because of that, it was literally like 90s choose your own adventure. The whole thing was just joyous from the first page to the last, and then it was topped off by the fact that John Scalzi was like, I wrote this book because I couldn't write another book, and it's the only time in my entire career where I've scrapped a book, and I was just so helpless. And so I sat down and I wrote this fun book that's meant to be fun for you to read, and it was fun for me to write, and I hope that you had a great time during it, but now you can go in and read other books. And I love that because this is a good example of conscious writing. John Scalzi knew exactly the vibe that he was serving you. He knew what you were coming here for, and he gave you that, and he did it really, really well, and then he left and he did something else. And it didn't have to mean more than what it meant, which meant that it ended up meaning a whole lot to me. I love this book, and I will legitimately read it again and again and again. Next up, a book that I really freaking did not love. A book which almost tempted that little slump monster to come back out. It was exactly the same situation as we had with Library of the Unwritten, where I had this book on my shelves for so long, and I was like, I am going to really enjoy that book when I read it. Everybody says it's great, and then I started reading it and I was not enjoying it. But I kept thinking to myself, oh, you need to pick it up and read it because you're supposed to be reading it. It's for your buddy read square on your bingo board. You need to read it. And that little slump monster sat in the background being like, yes, please continue on in exactly this manner. And so, like a sensible person, when I saw that little monster on the horizon, I was like, do you know what? No. And I DNF'd this a hard DNF. We will not be going back to this. This book is Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, and it caused me so much unironic pain. This is supposed to be a non-fiction account of one family who were incredibly rich and got into big pharma. They were the family who funded the creation of a bunch of opioids, which then created the opioid crisis in the States, and it was supposed to be a history of how that happened, how that family was allowed to do what they were allowed to do, what they've done about it, the accountability that they have not taken. It was supposed to be about that, but it was not. Instead, what half of this incredibly long book is. This book is so long and complicated that it has over 100 pages of just references at the back, and half of this extremely long and complicated book was just the life of one man. The life of the man who started off this family. It was an intense historical biography of him, and I didn't care. I would rather have put 100 coats of white paint onto a white wall than read any more of the start of this book. Now, like I say, I was buddy reading this with my lovely friend Kirsty, who is my co-host of Around the Disc in 800 Days, and she agrees the first half of this book is god-awful. She did, because she is a reading machine and because DNFing is just not in her nature, carry on to read the second half of the book, and she does say that it does pick up somewhat when you actually get to the part where they are manufacturing opioids, which is what this book is supposedly about, but that is by no means spectacular, and it remains really dry and uninteresting throughout. And quite honestly, I feel catfished by this book, because I went into this book for the true crime element. This wanted to be a biography, but the biography wouldn't have been interesting enough, so it ended up being a true crime book. And do you know what? Honestly, if nothing else came of this, then at least I have room for 3 more books on that bookshelf when I threw that one away. Alright, so just very briefly, I'm going to talk about this next top, and the only reason why it's very briefly is because I essentially have an entire 24-hour reading vlog where I just read this book, and I take you through all of my extreme reactions to reading it. And that book is The Black Feathers by Rebecca Netley. This is a gothic horror which leans on the literary fiction side of things. and oh, it was perfect. Rebecca Netley is another author who is very conscious of serving you a very particular vibe, but oh my god, she delivers that vibe. You guys know that I previously read The Whistling by Rebecca Netley and I was absolutely in love with it, but it does do something towards the last like 40 pages of the book where I was quite uncomfortable with one of the comments that one of the characters made. But I was still really worried that The Black Feathers was going to have another problematic element in it, because it does deal with mental health very strongly, and it did not. And let me tell you, not only did this one serve me the gothic, creepy, haunting vibe that I wanted, not only did this one serve me a slice of like Rebecca spliced with parts of Jane Eyre and The Woman in White, which are all books that you know are buzzwords for me, but also this book managed to serve me a trope which I would never have picked up if it had been on the blurb. If this trope had have been mentioned on the blurb, I would never have picked up this book, because it is something that I feel quite strongly about. It's a topic that I'm quite sensitive about, and yet when it popped up in the middle of this book, I was suddenly like, and I cannot tell you what that trope is because it will spoil one of the big twists in this book, but needless to say, I think that The Black Feathers is a really good example of sometimes even the things that you hate the most in books, if they are done by a writer that you absolutely love, will work for you, and this was definitely that for me. And I am telling you, the second that Rebecca Netley announces her next book, I am pre-ordering that sucker. Okay, so the next bottom that I'm going to talk about is not quite as egregious as the other books on this list. I don't absolutely loathe it, I just kind of nothing it. But it did do the extremely offensive thing of being one of those books that was on my wish list for a really long time, like one of those books that I just wanted to pick up eventually, that when I did pick it up ended up just being a massive disappointment. This is When the Dogs Don't Bark by Angela Gallop, and it is a true crime non-fiction account of Angela Gallop's career in the forensic sciences industry. This one has been one that's just been on the edge of my radar for forever. If you watch any true crime booktubers or bookstagrammers, they will have picked this one up at some point or another. Usually most of them rate it quite favourably too. I picked this one up when I was out one day and I had forgotten to bring a book or my headphones with me, and I had like 2 hours before I was going to meet a friend. So I went to one of my favourite bookshops, I had a browse, and then I parked myself in the cafe and I read my freaking book. And that part of the experience was amazing. Like, how often do I buy books and read them the same day, let alone like the next day or the next week? You can hear all of the books on my TBR being like, help me. So that part of the experience was absolutely immaculate, and I'm not gonna lie, the first like 20 pages of this one are very immersive, because this is essentially just Angela Gallop's life. She talks about the fact that when she started in the forensic sciences industry, she was one of the only women, and quite a lot of the men around her were actually straight to her face like, just FYI, you're never going to get promoted or given any like serious cases, because I don't believe women can do this job. Not only did she excel, but she eventually opened her own private company which consulted independently of the police or anybody else so that they could give truly unbiased results. So like, she really is a trailblazer, and as a person I think she's really funny. There are a lot of points in this book where there's serious tongue-in-cheek humour. There are a lot of points in this book where Angela Gallop talks about quite a few cases in the UK which are not really talked about in true crime books anywhere. Obviously there are the same buzzword murders in the UK over and over again, like the Moors murders and things like that, but again, I'm not just interested in serial killers. There are a lot of things that have happened in the UK which are very famous and are very stuck in like the consciousness of the British public, me included, and this book did talk a lot about that. But unfortunately I feel like what Angela Gallop did was she took a massive swing. She wanted to make this like a history of women in forensic science. She wanted to make it a memoir of her career and her personal life, and she also wanted to talk about all of these individual cases. But then on top of that, she structured the book in such a way where every chapter introduced you to a new part of forensic science, like blood analysis, like fingerprints, that kind of thing. But for the most part, anybody who's going to be picking up this book to learn about that stuff is a person who's already interested in that. And really the internet has so much information now, and like TV shows casually throw around all of this information, that most of the stuff that was in this book that she was explaining to me was stuff I already knew about and I think most people would know about. And so although we got the history of it, I felt very much like at least 50% of this book just didn't need to be there. I wanted the more human aspect of it, and instead I felt like I was sitting in a lecture a lot of the time. Like it was kind of forensics 101, what to expect if you go into this career. I felt like I was really being held at arm's length, and so this book was just fine. I just nothinged this, but it's on my bottoms because I keep thinking about it, and I keep thinking about all of the things that could have been better about it, all of the things that she could have done and different choices she could have made to make it more engaging, and I feel like it's a massive missed opportunity. So that is why this one is here. Next up, however, we have a book that not only sold atmosphere, not only created a vibe, but also drew me in so quickly. I cannot believe how fast I was invested in these characters and this mystery, and considering this book is so dark, so incredibly Dark Night of the Soul dark, I was still so pulled in and so wanted these characters to be okay by the end of it, and that book is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. This is Ashley Winstead's second of 3 thrillers, of which I own all 3 without having read them until I picked this one up. I've talked to you guys about this phenomenon before. I try not to do it as much as possible these days. I try not to gather books by an author because I think, oh my god, I'm gonna love them, because I have been massively burned in the past. But this was one of those occasions where my instincts absolutely paid off. They paid off 100%, because I am going to make it my priority to read all of Ashley Winstead's backlist, including her romances, and you know how little I say that. And if you're waiting for a scorcher about a romance, then just wait for the next book. Now this one is a thriller, but I also feel like it's got one foot in horror. You know, like hyper-realism horror where the horrific things are actually the people? That definitely felt like it described this book. I read half of this on sprints with my patrons because I was just eating it so fast. And it's funny because the way in which Ashley Winstead just throws you into the action at the beginning of this book, we are just introduced to this main character. We don't get any of her backstory, nothing. She's just literally sitting there painting her toenails and listening to a podcast in which she hears her name. The way that she just catapults you into that, and you feel immediately claustrophobic and immediately like grabbed by the throat and immediately like, oh, bad things are going to happen there. I do not like this. I don't like the vibes. The vibes are off. It's kind of spectacular because on the surface, if you described this character to me and the situation in which we find this character at the start of this book, I would have been like, ugh, don't want it. Sounds a little domestic thrillery. Sounds like a ton of privilege. I don't want to engage with that kind of narrative. But ooh, this one is definitely a lesson in don't make assumptions, because every assumption that you have made, every assumption the characters have made, they're all freaking wrong. But I also didn't feel like it was like forcing that down my throat. Like I didn't feel like it was teaching me a lesson when I was reading this. This one was another book where I felt very viscerally in the main character's head, where there's a lot of things about the main character that shouldn't have worked for me. There's a lot of reasons why I should have felt very like held at a distance from her. She's quite a standoffish person. She doesn't give a lot. But the little moments of humanity that Ashley Winstead popped into that character's brain, the moments where she would be fine for paragraphs and paragraphs and then there would just be one line that told you what was really happening, and the way that she felt was just masterful. And I actually had physical reactions to this book. I had physical anxiety reactions. I had moments of like actual full shock. And I mean, really, if you need an example of a book that makes you feel the things and doesn't tell you what you should be feeling, this one is definitely one of them. And I really, really think that Ashley Winstead is going to be another favourite author for me. I can feel it in my bones. She's going to be another author that I just pre-order it the second that she releases it, and I am so glad for it. Because although my 2023 reading year has been predominantly quite good, there are very few books in all of it where I'm like, that's an absolute standout. That's a book that I'm going to think about forever, and this is one of them. And then last up on my list of bottoms, we have a romance, as promised. And I'm sure by this point there are quite a few of you who are sitting there going, you just don't like romance, do you? But that's just not true. I do like romance. I like romance a lot. The entire Parasol Protectorate series by Gail Carriger is essentially a romance. Tessa Dare's books, absolutely love them. And I think you could argue that several of the big series that I love the most in my life, like Illuminae for example, are actually romance series with other elements. I am a paranormal romance girly. I read Patricia Briggs. I love certain kinds of romance, and 2023 has definitely been a journey for me, both in finding romances that work for me, but also in finding books with low stakes that I can read at bedtime when I need a book that can just not be filled with some of the really horrible high stakes that I read about during the day when I feel fine. I am genuinely trying to find the tropes and the settings in which romance books work for me. And one of those romance books that had been on my list for quite a while and has been recommended to me ad nauseum by so many people is The Roommate by Rosie Danan. I've had this one on my Kindle for what feels like years. I don't know exactly when this book came out, but it's been a while. And I know that this book now has a sequel which everybody also loves. And the thing is, I want so badly to like contemporary romance, because what I really need is a contemporary romance which also manages to do slice of life. So a contemporary romance in which there are other stakes in these people's lives and they come together despite that. And The Roommate felt like it actually might have a bit of that, because these two characters are from very different walks of life, and obviously one of these characters works in the adult entertainment industry, which I was so excited to read about. I was like so excited to see that perspective, but unfortunately I just don't get this one. And normally I would just write that off and be like, okay, this one wasn't for me. Like, for example, I tried the Twisted Love series by Anna Huang because lots and lots of people are like, oh, I'm obsessed with it, it's one of my favourite romance series in the world. I tried it and it was just not for me. Like, I could see what it was doing and I could see why a particular set of romance readers really loved those books, but it just wasn't for me. And so I didn't even mention it in a tops and bottoms, because it wasn't even a case where I wanted to sit here and be like, these are all the things that are wrong with it, because I just recognised that that book wasn't for me. But when it comes to this one, I'm like, it's not so much that the book wasn't for me, because I actually quite liked the voice of Rosie Danan's characters, and I really liked some of the setup. I liked the fact that they were just shoved into being roommates, and that one of them had never been a roommate before and she was not okay with all of the things that come with sharing a living space, and so was trying to like control her way into feeling comfortable about it. That felt really relatable. But there were some truly horrifically objectionable things in this book, and I don't know why you guys like it. There is, within the first 3 chapters of this book, a massive section where the two characters go grocery shopping together, and not only does she internally food shame what he is buying, but she then holds herself up as an ideal of comparison because all she has put in her cart is low-fat yogurt. And look how much better she is and how much more morally correct she is for eating properly. And then in the very next breath there's a whole paragraph that's like, but despite the fact that she eats this way, she still has a massive juicy ass and big boobs. Because of course she does. Because of course she does. And this book continued to be littered with things like that, where I would be enjoying the narrative and then all of a sudden I would be pulled up incredibly short by something where I was like, well, that's not okay. I can't remember either of their names, but there's a moment where the male main character walks in and catches the female character watching his online adult entertainment videos, and not only does he not immediately make her aware that he is there, he stands there watching her in a vulnerable situation, enjoying her body in a vulnerable situation without any of her consent. And then later on he kind of manipulates this situation into her feeling like a prude and him getting to have sex with her. And the whole thing just gave me the massive freaking ick. There were so many times in here where I was like, you two should not be together. You two are not good for each other. And I think that Rosie Danan felt like she was serving street smarts in that male main character, but instead she was just serving up coercive control. So this is one where I'm not like, oh, these tropes didn't work for me, this book is not for me, but why is this book for you? So yeah, Rosie Danan and I will be parting company, and I will be off to my next attempt at contemporary romance. But now we get to the last top on my list, which is Talking to My Country by Stan Grant. I hadn't actually heard about this book until Kirsty and I went on our road trip earlier on this year, and during this road trip we got talking about literature from Indigenous peoples, and Kirsty recommended this one to me and I picked it up then and there on my Kindle. This is an absolutely phenomenal book, one of those books that I think actually deserves to be called a powerful book. I mean, you know that word gets slapped on every literary fiction book and every memoir which has ever existed, but this one actually really deserves it. And this one is also amazing in my opinion because it's one of the few books that I've come across which has actually been adapted from a smaller piece of journalism and expanded into a whole book, and which has stuff to say throughout that whole book which is unique. This one is adapted from a 2015 article that Stan Grant wrote in response to an extremely racist event which was very high in the Australian consciousness at the time, and it was such an important piece with such resonance that this book was then born off it. Stan Grant talks in a serious amount of depth in this one about what it feels like to be othered, what it feels like to exist in a society that constantly tells you you're part of that society, that tells you that you must contribute to that society, and that treats you in a much worse way than anybody else if you break the rules of that society, but to know abjectly that you do not belong here. And that's one of the things that stuck with me so much in this one, is the inherent knowledge that the Indigenous peoples that Stan Grant is talking about are born with the knowledge that they are less than, and that they do not have the social ability to make themselves more than. And although this was written in 2016, it is clearly, sadly, horrifically still needed right now, because Australia has just gone through a failed vote to Parliament to allow Indigenous people to just have a voice. They weren't asking for any executive powers, they were just asking for a voice to advise how it would be better to incorporate their cultures and to respect their beliefs, and to allow Indigenous people to more fully integrate into the society that they are constantly told that they should contribute towards. In a really harrowing way, proves the point of everything that Stan Grant is talking about in this, and all the things that he said felt horrifically like foreshadowing. Pretty much everything that he predicted would continue to happen has continued to happen. This one covers such vast ground in such a tiny little book. It covers Indigenous people's mental health. It covers the way in which they are allowed to hold wealth and status in this society. It covers the way in which government governs people's bodies but is not then responsible for the effect. And I just don't know how Stan Grant found it in himself to take the time to educate other people on his experience, and to do it so eloquently when he is so angry and feels so let down and feels so disenfranchised, and yet he still took the time to explain to us what this experience feels like. It's just an amazing book, and I feel like it's going to stick with me forever. I have read so many news articles and watched so many think pieces since then, and there are so many things that I keep coming back to again and again and again in this book, and I'm so glad that Kirsty recommended it to me. So that is it, guys. That is everything for my tops and bottoms this time around. I feel like this year I've had quite a few really chunky tops and bottoms, and I think that's because 2023 contains some of my best reading months ever. I think it shows, because I've been equally enthusiastic about the things that I have loved in this video as I have been about the things that I absolutely hated. So I hope you guys don't mind the slightly chunky tops and bottoms that we've had recently. If you have made it all of the way through this video, then please leave me your favourite dinosaur emoji down below, and also tell me in the comments what your favourite dinosaur is. I feel like we get so few opportunities here to really unite over my special interest, so please tell me about your dinosaur special interest down in the comments. Don't forget that if you would like 35% off of a gift for your loved ones this festive season from Anna Louisa, then you can follow my link down below to get the best offer that they currently have. And as always, if you have read any of the books on this list and you agree with me or you disagree with me, then please leave your opinion down below, because we do like opinions here. And if you have any books that you would like to recommend to me based on the books that I have liked here today, or maybe as an antidote to the things that I haven't liked, please recommend me some contemporary romances that will work for me, guys, then leave that all down below in the comments too. If you are new here, then remember, end of year videos are starting to come up soon. All of those delicious tops, bottoms and statistics for the whole year will be available for you, so hit that subscribe button and stick around. And if you are a returning subscriber who liked this video, hello, I see you. Thank you for sticking around, and please hit that like button on your way out, because it really does help my channel. And I will speak to you guys soon. Bye!